Thank you, Madam President. I couldn't agree more with the comments that this is a dark day here in Minnesota. Members, it's not often that we have life and death debates in this chamber, but that's what we're having here today. A debate about creating a culture of life in Minnesota or creating a culture of death. I feel compelled to speak on behalf of those of us who want Minnesota to promote a culture of life, and why I think this conversation is critical for anyone who is on the fence still about whether or not to vote for this bill in this form with this language. Why I think it is critical to dispel and contrast some of the beliefs that have led to the creation of this bill. There's been a lot of personal stories shared today, and there are a couple that I would like to share to shed some light on this conversation. In my family alone, 3 generations of women, 3 generations of women in a row have had to buck the modern medical advice they were being given and choose life. It starts in 1949 when Beverly Coleman contracted the German measles. Her doctors urged her to find a way to end that pregnancy. That child she was carrying in her belly would be born with severe abnormalities as a result of her condition. Beverly chose a culture of life. That August, she gave birth to Norman Bertram Coleman Jr. Norm grew up to become the mayor of St. Paul, a United States senator, a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a patriot who has done amazing things for the state of Minnesota and the United States of America. Like all lives, Norm's life has value. Fast forward, and Norm's expecting his first child with his wife, my mother-in-law, Lori. After a long labor, Lori delivers a little boy named Adam. The room went silent, and she heard the words no mother ever wants to hear. There's something wrong with this baby. Suddenly, the codes were called, the room got busy again. It turns out Adam had something called Zellweger's syndrome, a fatal and very rare genetic disorder. Adam was brought home, and for 6 weeks, Adam experienced his mother's warmth, his father's kisses, warm blankets, a full belly, and he passed away knowing what it meant to be loved. His short time on earth was so impactful that at every Coleman family gathering, Adam is talked about. In fact, my oldest son carries his name on today. Like all lives, Adam's life, albeit short, had immense value. A few years later, my mother-in-law is expecting again. She goes in to the doctor, and with anger in his voice, he says, "How dare you do this? How dare you get pregnant again? You must abort this child. You are sentencing this child to the exact same fate, and to carry this pregnancy to term would be nothing short of an act of cruelty." Lori walked out of that clinic and never came back. A few months later, in March, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Jacob. Jacob grew up to be a contributing member of society and a loving father who is an impeccable example of what I want my little boys to grow up to be like someday. Like all lives, Jacob's life has value. Let's go to the 3rd generation here, in a row. Jacob and I are expecting the twins. We were told from the onset that our particular type of twin, identical monochorionic diamniotic twins, came with a whole host of issues and complications. And the issues started coming up very early in my pregnancy. For up to 12 hours per week, Jacob and I would drive in silence to our maternal fetal medicine specialist, praying that the ultrasound technician that morning would be able to find 2 heartbeats. For up to 12 hours a week, we studied the chambers of their hearts, their fingers and toes, their brains. The doctors knew their names, and sometimes when the scan wasn't looking good, the ultrasound technician, in an act of grace and mercy, would turn on the 3D ultrasound so we could catch a glimpse of Charlie's face before he passed away. When the situation started to get worse, we were referred to a number of other specialists. One specialist in particular pushed a procedure called selective reduction, an amendment we tried to address here in this chamber today. Let me tell you, members, about selective reduction. The doctors would open me up, cut the shared ties between Charles and James. They would cut Charlie's umbilical cord, and he would pass away, die, in my womb. James would grow alongside his dead twin's body, be delivered, placed in my arms as his identical brother, would be discarded. James would grow up with the piece of him missing. He would grow up with the horror of knowing that there was death right next to him as he grew, and that death happened at the hands of his own mother. I left that clinic and I never came back. I chose a culture of life. I chose trust. The medical evidence at the time suggested that if I did not kill Charles, when he died, his blood would clot, and because he shared vessels with James, James would suffer a stroke and die. There would then be a risk to my own life, as clots, hemorrhaging, and infection would be next in the series of events. At 33 weeks, 12 hours after the adjournment of the 2021 legislative session, I gave birth to 2 healthy, beautiful baby boys. I can't imagine James without Charles, or vice versa. Their bond and their connection is something I watch in awe and wonder of every single day. In fact, when Charles was struggling in the NICU, one brilliant nurse said, "Let's put them together." They put James into Charles' incubator, and all of the alarms went silent. His blood pressure, his body temperature, his heart rate all started to level out with the presence of his brother there. Like all lives, their stories have value. Like all lives, they deserved a shot. After their birth, I saw firsthand why late-term abortions are too extreme for Minnesotans. At 33 weeks, these tiny, beautiful babies were something to behold. Full heads of hair, big eyes, these whimpering tiny cries. I saw them respond differently to their mother's touch than that of a nurse's. But it wasn't all pretty. With a tightness in my chest and a knot in my stomach, I would watch as the wonderful doctors and nurses there would try to draw blood for some testing, would try to replace an IV. I'd hear their cries, I'd hear the baby's cries from across the hall when veins were collapsing and a new IV had to be placed. Sometimes it would be too much for me, and as soon as my babies were back sleeping, I'd have to grab Jacob's hand, walk outside, and have a moment. Today, we are discussing a bill that would inflict unimaginable pain on babies like Charles and James. Pain much worse than a needle poke. Pain that is cruel, limbs torn off, organs sucked out. After seeing how my little 33-weekers responded to a needle poke, the idea of inflicting the pain I just described on a child at that stage of development is nothing short of barbaric. And the worst part is, the Democrats here today refused measures to ease their pain, refused to end practices that future generations will look back upon in horror. They refused to speak up for the most vulnerable Minnesotans. This bill is sending a message to women that the best way out of a tough situation is through ending the life of their own child. Madam President, it is my sincere hope that the women of Minnesota know that I am speaking from experience today when I say they are stronger than they know. And I am sorry not one Democrat has stood up today and told them that. I know what it's like to choose life in the scariest of circumstances, when arguably my life and certainly the life of one of my children was on the line. And let me tell you, you will never regret choosing life. One day, a mother who is considering walking out of that clinic, putting that abortion pill down, she will come home, and a little boy or girl will run up to them, wrap their arms around their neck, and say, "Mommy, I missed you, and I love you." One day, she will look back and realize that while she faced hardships, that she discovered she is stronger and braver than she ever imagined. One day, she will thank God for the decision she made, because you will never regret choosing life. Madam President, my message to members across the aisle: even if you are pro-choice, please consider what this bill says about the culture you want for Minnesota. Do you want a culture of life or a culture of death? Think about what this bill says about women, about parents, about children. Even if you are pro-choice, if there is a shred of doubt in your mind that this bill is too extreme for you, your district, or for Minnesota, please vote no. Members, I urge a resounding no vote on this bill. I choose a culture of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coleman, for sharing your story.